1933. A team of geologists tramped through a remote forest in northern British Columbia. Their only lifeline to civilization was their radio operator, Donald Hings. He knew Morse code and could communicate with head office. But Donald also completely embraced new technology.
He was a scientist, an untrained scientist. He didn't have a formal education, but he thought like a scientist. He was always finding problems that perplexed him. And then he would tackle those problems by inventing some crazy contraptions.
The geologists finished their job and prepared to head back. But there was an unexpected problem. Donald learned that they were stranded. Bad weather had grounded the plane that was supposed to collect them. So to get back to civilization, the team decided to hike through treacherous terrain.
Having to trek out on foot illustrated very personally to him how remote these locations really were, how lost these guys were if they didn't have that umbilical cord back to home office.
At home, Donald could not stop thinking about the experience. He wondered if it were possible to build a two-way radio anyone could use, without a middleman and without learning complicated codes. In the 1930s, it was much easier to send a radio message in Morse code than trying to radio the human voice.
It's not enough just to tell that somebody is speaking or not speaking. You actually have to make out the sounds and the words. And so to do that required a lot more technology than a simple Morse code set.
But the technology was huge, required lots of space, and was impossible to transport in a backpack.
The technologies for doing voice radio were well understood at the time. They were just too big and too clumsy to be useful for his application. So you start with that. You start with the radio sets that you do have. They're big, so you miniaturize them. You get them as small as you can.
So Donald had to miniaturize the radio. But at the same time, boost the power of its signal so voices could be transmitted clearly over a distance.
To make a voice signal come through clearly, you need lots of power, and to have lots of power, you need a big radio. And so it was just at cross purposes to the whole notion of portable voice communication.
Donald realized he would have to reinvent radio circuitry. The complex wiring used to join radio waves to a voice signal would have to change. He also had to find a way to reduce the number of glass vacuum tubes that controlled the flow of electricity within the circuit. Through trial and error, he created one small vacuum tube that previously did the work of 4 tubes. This meant that the radio wave could go through the tube at the same time as the voice signal, creating a super boosted clear sound. Donald then began working on shrinking other components and experimented to find the right antennas and wavelengths.
Accomplishing all those things at once was the problem that my grandfather solved. It wasn't just a single invention. It was a very complex invention that had many, many different parts that all added up to what was at the time a really cutting-edge piece of complicated technology.
When Donald showed his prototype to his bosses, they saw huge potential.
All right, let's give this a try.
But the real test was to see how Donald's radio worked in action.
I don't really know if he would have been nervous as opposed to excited. I mean, you know, sure, it's his job. There's a certain expectation that he's going to accomplish things, but I think he was granted a certain amount of leeway because you're doing something that hasn't been done before. You know, your bosses, if they're halfway smart, aren't going to realize that, you know, this might not work perfectly the first time.
He moved deep into the bush.
Testing.
Testing.
I hear you, Donald. I hear you.
Loud and clear.
Minimal static.
Testing.
Maximum clarity.
Testing.
I hear you, Donald. I hear
He always had this kind of a skip and a clap, and he would say "yeah" when something he got it working just the way he wanted it to. I imagine that he probably gave a very big, loud, and excited one when he got his first radio sets working.
Testing.
Donald's invention meant he no longer had to work in the field, so he had more time to work on ideas back at base, where he made modifications to his two-way radio.
It was capable of sending out a voice transmission that could be picked up by the next nearest radio camp so that signals could be relayed all the way back to home office.
During World War II, it was used with great success by the Canadian and British military. The device also got a new name.
The walkie-talkie was named by journalists during the war when they saw some of the early radios that were being used, and it was like, so you can walk with it and you can talk with it. Quite obviously, a walkie-talkie.
The walkie-talkie revolutionized military communication. Over half a century later, in 2001, Donald Hings received an Order of Canada for saving countless lives on the battlefield and in the bush.